Hello, welcome to the One Life Church devotional series where we cover the entire Bible in 20 months. Well, the chapters today are 2 Kings 9 and 10. I think two of the most bloodthirsty chapters in the entire Bible. If it was turned into a movie, I certainly go and watch it. It would be X-rated. Now, when I read these, I couldn't help thinking of that history lesson I had back in school many years ago, which the teacher entitled The Night of the Long Knives. I'm sitting in a church house here in Johannesburg. I'm preaching it up here this weekend, and I found their knives in the kitchen. Do you remember 1934, Adolf Hitler, when he took out his political opposition? The conservative estimate is 85 politicians died those 3 days. Some people say more than 1,000 of them died. He used the Gestapo, he used the SS, his friends Göring and Himmler, to help him achieve it. He took out one of his supporters, one of his friends, Ernst Röhm, who was leading a faction more liberal than Hitler would like, called the Brown Shirts. Bloodthirsty. That's what this chapter was like. Just taking out your political opposition. What happened like this? Elisha sends a message to Jehu, one of the military commanders. This is what God says. God says you are going to be king of Israel. So he gets a prophet to anoint him. He's king. And he says to him, take out Ahab, all the descendants of Ahab, and all the Baal worship. Well, Jehu took that literally. He immediately goes to Jezreel, where the king of Israel is hanging out. It's King Joram, recovering from an injury. And he goes right into the city. The watchmen at the gate say, a man is coming. The king says, go find out who he is. But the guy who went out to find out just tucked in behind Jehu and came running towards him. This happened a number of times until the king gets into his chariot with King Ahazi, who was from Judah, who was visiting him at the time. And they both got out in their chariots to meet Jehu. But as soon as they make themselves known and it becomes apparent that this is going to be murder, King Joram turns his chariot around and goes flying back. He's obviously ahead of the king of Judah, and he shouts, treason, treason. But Jehu is a good shot, takes his arrow, shoots him, kills him. So the king of Judah is dead, the king of Israel is dead, and Jehu makes his way into Jezreel looking for Jezebel, because she was the real power behind the whole Ahab dynasty. So she makes her makeup, she does her hair up, looks out of the window, and Jehu looks up and says to her bodyguards, if you for me, chuck her down from that top floor. She splatters on the floor. They leave her there while they go inside, and the dogs eat her. Horrific. Imagine that as a movie. Well, the movie's not over. Chapter 10's even worse. He sends a message to Samaria where the kids are of Joram. He's got 70 kids, descendants of Ahab, and they're being raised by the noblemen of the city. So he sends a letter to the nobleman. He says, listen, pick one of those kids, make him a king, because your king is dead now. And then get ready to defend him, because we're coming. We're coming to take you out. Well, the nobleman said, well, we're not going to defend these kids anymore. What do you want? We'll back you. And so Jehu says, give me their heads. So these noblemen go and take off the heads of 70 kids, load them in baskets, send them off to Jehu. Jehu piles them up outside the city gates. Can you believe this? And it's not over. He then summons his Baal worship, and he pretends he wants to worship Baal, gets all the Baal priests, hundreds of them, into a building, puts them in their garb so that he knows exactly who the Baal priests are, and then he locks the doors and he kills all of them. Now, at the end of that, you've got to ask yourself, what the heck? I was standing up at this conference this morning, and I said at the first session, I was going to minister to you out of my devotion today, because that's what I did at the conference I spoke at yesterday. But I just don't know what to say about a chapter like this, so bloodthirsty. So I'm going to preach something else. Some woman comes up to me afterwards and says, no, you missed it. You should have preached through this. This is God saying that if any leader in the church stands up and doesn't represent God well, he'll get rid of them. And then she proceeded to say, the principalities and powers, we called to get rid of them. Well, I don't know so much about what that lady had to say, but I can tell you this. You can't mess with God. And he doesn't tolerate idol worship, which is what the motivation was behind changing the king in Israel. Now, Baal worship, idolatry, putting anything in the place of God is bad for people. It's bad for their eternity. It's bad for their present world. It's bad for their health. And God loves people. And so he judges idolatry. And he judges leaders who take people into idolatry. You can't mess with him. And you can't mess with his people. Well, I do pray that by the time you finish these 2 chapters, you see that it is God's judgment on idolatry. It's God's judgment on the things that harm his people and causes people to go astray, that he's very definitely against you. God loves you. God bless you.